This is the plenary session for the Royal Australian Artillery Historical Company's Firepower Lessons from the Great War seminar series. This session covers the Western Front, the Spring Offensive and Villers Brettoneux, and is chaired by Professor Peter Stanley.
This is the Principles of War podcast, professional military education for junior officers and senior NCOs.
Who's first? Mr. Goyne.
Hello, I'm David Goyne. Look, there are four great presentations tonight, all very interesting and very informative. But my question is to Roger Lee. You said that, unlike the common story that was Lloyd George that held back the reinforcements, it was actually the Chief of General Staff. Was that Willie Robertson, who I find that hard to believe of, or was it Henry Wilson, who I would find it more likely and probably following Lloyd George's orders in that case?
Yeah, it's a good question. And you're right, it was mainly Henry Wilson, and it was also the Army Council. They were worried about the strengths in some of the other theatres, if you put it that way. They were also concerned about, don't forget, Lloyd George was a fairly ferocious Prime Minister. I suspect Henry Wilson was playing games, as he usually did with Lloyd George. I don't want to exonerate Lloyd George from participation in this decision either. He certainly was in there muddying the waters, but in the past it was fashionable for people in uniform to bash him solely, and I think there are a few other people in the circle that need to take some blame for it. But we were talking about, they had 387,000 replacements and reinforcements in Britain, and they sent 118,000. So when you're looking at the loss rates that you're talking about in Passchendaele, that's a significant under replenishment to frontline troops, frontline formations. So it's a significant impact, that decision.
Thank you. My name is Michael Crane, a retired gunner officer, and my question's for Elizabeth. And on the 75mm gun, I'm just wondering, what was it about the gun that made it so important and so ubiquitous? I think you mentioned that it was easy to move, could be moved quickly. I seem to remember dimly and darkly from my equipment principles lessons on my young officers course that maybe there was something revolutionary about the recoil system as well. But perhaps maybe I missed it in what you were saying, but if you could explain, that'd be great. Thank you.
Yes, it's the recoil system, which is the famous thing about the 75. It was a hydraulic recoil, which meant that the recoil was hardly there at all, which meant that you could fire again very quickly. You didn't need to relay it. So that was the most important. And the French kept this, the secret of manufacturing this. They kept it very tightly. They didn't want anybody else to repeat the advantage that it gave them. It's interesting that there was a lot of discussion about getting the Americans, once they'd come into the war, to build 75s in the States. And in fact, eventually the French agreed that they would send over the drawings, but of course they were all metric. So it proved extremely difficult to build them.
Thanks. Tim McKenna. My question's for Will, and I might have got this wrong. You mentioned 15th Brigade's of interest to me. My grandfather fought in that battle in that brigade. Did you mention that horse artillery were put under direct command of the brigade? And if that's true, could you answer that? But I have just one other quick question for Elizabeth too. The question about tanks belonging to the artillery, was that right with the French? Maybe at some stage you could just give me a quick answer on that too.
Do you want to do that first? Yes, the French called tanks, and they hated the word tank. Their tanks are artillerie spéciale, so it's special artillery, and it comes under the heading of artillery, and therefore that's why it's always included in any discussion of French artillery. I didn't want to start on the topic because it's a huge topic by itself, so I didn't want to say any more than I did. But the French tank was developed at the same time as the British, completely unknown to each other. They didn't realise the British were experimenting with tanks. the French were doing at the same time. It was only just before the Battle of the Somme that Etienne, the French general, who was called the father of tanks, discovered that the British were doing something similar. And their heavy tanks were pretty useless, actually. But it's the Renault FT which is the great thing, and was used right up to the Second World War, I believe.
Thanks.
And so, to your question about the 16th Brigade Horse Artillery, they were very early on the 24th put under command of 15th Brigade, who then allotted it to the 57th Battalion, who the forward, the closest unit to the action. And then, as Elliot was trying, the brigade commander was trying to develop a plan and get his counterattack and action and signed off on. They sort of manoeuvred closer down to Villers, Brettoneux. They were there ready to be used if necessary. And then once the orders for the counterattack came through in the afternoon, the 16th Brigade was the only artillery unit that actually had a direct task, which was to be responsive to the direction of Commander 15th Brigade. Unfortunately, and I dug around to actually find out what they did and whether there were any requests for support during the battle from 10 p.m. onwards. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to find anything. It doesn't necessarily suggest that there weren't any requests made for them. It's buried and lost in the mists of time. I'm imagining that their own war diary might shed more light onto it, but I didn't have access to it in preparing this talk. Unfortunately, it would be something interesting to look at because, as I said, they were the only artillery unit given a specific task beyond just providing a protective barrage.
Tim, if I can just add something. This is not unusual. In, say, the Battle of Menin Road, which, bit of a plug here, my book on Menin Road's coming out in the campaign series soon, I hope. They had a whole raft of batteries allocated to brigades. They broke their artillery up into three groups at Menin Road. There was the counter battery and the long range stuff, then there was the organic stuff, which is firing the barrage directly in front. And then a whole bunch of separate batteries were broken off and given to each of the brigades in the assaulting brigades, and they had direct communications with them, and they had first call on them. If they weren't being used, they were adding to the barrage, but they were used directly in support, and they practiced this. So this is not unusual. So Pompey Elliott would be quite comfortable being given 1, 2, or even 4 batteries, given whatever his task was. So by 1918, this is doctrine.
Thank you. There's a naval officer in the middle who wants to say something. If you do want to contribute, stick your hand up so I can point at you. It's not like an auction where you raise an eyebrow. I just don't see it.
G'day, this question's for Darryl, sir. Paul Connor, Navy Lieutenant out at Training Authority Maritime Warfare from HMAS Watson in Sydney. My question to you, Darryl, is, having recently retired from the Army and noting the growing investment in the cyber and space warfare domains, how do you see the role of artillery adopting to the future battle space? Sir.
That's a good one, mate.
I think artillery is always going to be there and to provide that clear support, because we can fire in no matter what weather, and it's a stable, well-trained environment. To put it into the cyber warfare area, I think it is vulnerable in regards to our over-dependence on technology. But if we can still fire good effective fire using manual systems when it's needed most, we'll win on that space.
I thought Darryl's answer would be not my problem. But
I think Bob will really agree with me.
You know? No? Yes, at the back there.
My question's for Elizabeth. You spoke about the sound ranging and flash spotting techniques that were developed by the French. I was wondering if you could elaborate on how they use these techniques to achieve counter-battery fire.
Well, once you've got the exact coordinates of the battery that's firing at you, you're able to shoot back. I think that's basically it, isn't it? You sort out, you measure the sound, you calculate the time when a listener hears the sound. You have several listeners, of course, and that's either the sound or the flash spotting. That wasn't the only way of locating enemy batteries. The aviation was very important. The French used their aviation for finding out where enemy batteries were, observing the enemy front lines. They preferred to do that rather than go on bombing missions, which is what the RAF seemed to want to do. So I'm not entirely clear what
Sorry, just to elaborate, more so the British centralised a lot of their artillery intelligence to a divisional level, I believe. I was just wondering how the French organised that intelligence stream to best affect the battlefield.
Yes. They had an SRA, a Service de Renseignement à l'Artillerie, which is an intelligence service which is dedicated solely to things like counter-battery work and so on. So they have their own intelligence service, which includes the topographers doing the maps and the intelligence coming in from prisoners, and it covers just about everything. So the intelligence for the artillery was extremely well developed. I didn't talk about it simply because, you can't mention everything in 20 minutes. But it was an extremely well-developed system working at army headquarters level, and also in 1918, when Foch was Allied Supreme Commander, he'd got the chief of... he was more involved with aerial intelligence, but he had him at his headquarters. So the importance of intelligence for things like counter-battery work and all artillery work were well recognised and well organised.
Thank you.
Can I ask, I'll just Craig, Luke, you alluded twice, Elizabeth.
You do. Microphone.
Oh, you're right. Thanks. Peter Stanley, Elizabeth, you've alluded to the simultaneous development by British and French of tanks and of sound ranging and presumably other things. So did they develop a system of sharing lessons learned from successive battles through the war, and were they eventually sharing the conclusions they formed?
Not really. There was a big problem that systems were not the same. I mean, the British talk about 18-pounders and the French talk about their 75mm guns, so it's a bit difficult. There's a lot of national pride and prejudice comes into this. The Allied reserve of artillery, which Albert Thomas had tried to suggest in 1915 and was being actively pushed by the French in 1918, simply did not happen. By the end, in the counteroffensives in the last 112 days to victory, I'm not going to say 100, in the last 112 days to victory, the troops were very much intermingled. So what tended to happen was that artillery batteries were left in position with their the servers who belong to the battery. So you'd get French batteries with British troops and so on, and vice versa. So no, the cooperation is pretty abysmal.
So I'll just give the mic to Luke. But what did the Americans do then? Because they had a French equipment.
Yes, well, in fact, it was easier to deal with the Americans because they were using French guns. So it was a lot easier to work together.
My name's Luke Carroll. I'm just interested in the mention of increasing use of gas at this stage in the war, and I apologise. It's got to be a general question to the panel. I'm interested in if you can tell us anything about the effect that the use of gas against the gun lines had, because obviously I can't imagine how you could possibly service a gun at that time in a gas mask, and reliance on horses to be able to move the guns. How, if at all, were horses protected from the effects of gas other than to move them away, which then, of course, made the guns immobile and more susceptible to other forms of attacking fire?
Yeah, it's a good question, Luke, and it's certainly what happened. It was one of the triggers for the mechanisation of the British artillery, the vulnerability of horses. It certainly slowed down. It plays up in Passchendaele, where the Germans use gas against the British batteries that are moved. You know how difficult it was. But gas is very good against dispersed troops who aren't working hard like artillery, and it had a big effect. I think I said in my presentation that basically the British supporting artillery was effectively neutralised in the first couple of days of Operation Michael. And that's one of the reasons why the Germans were as successful as they were. The second thing was their dispersed tactics. They didn't provide a nice artillery package to be dealt with. So it was only later on when they started to get funneled into lines of attack, when they get to Villers, Brettoneux, where they have to stop and then mount another attack, they become vulnerable. But certainly, gas was very effective. The way it's solved, the British retaliate in kind and plus 10. I've dined out on the fact that the Germans always use gas first. The Allies take the high moral ground and then reply with much more. There were more German soldiers disabled or killed by gas than there were Allied soldiers. The most feared unit on the Western Front, at least in the English literature, is the Royal Engineer Special Brigade. And it was known by 1918 German troop morale would plummet when they knew they were opposite them in the lines. They became very effective at it. So we use gas backwards to them with the same effect, which is one reason why the Germans' level of artillery support declines, is that apart from supply problems and apart from all the other issues of an army trying to advance across that sort of country in any sort of time, that's one contributing factor to why the German artillery support declines.
And is there a French answer to that?
French are just as good with gas.
Yeah. The French used gas first, actually, even before the Germans at Ypres. Yes, the whole point about gas is to keep the enemy gunners' heads down. And the point about horses, their horses had gas masks, as well as there are photographs of horses being fitted with gas masks. So the big problem with artillery is it churns up the ground. So if you can fire less HE and have the same effect with smoke or gas, then that means you can move forward because you haven't got a cratered ground to cross. So that's the point of using the gas. The smoke blinds the enemy gunners, and the gas makes them and the infantry keep their heads down. So that's it. That's the point. Did you want to say?
It's also the second and third order effects of the gas as well. So it soddens into uniforms. So when the gas cloud has gone, the residual effects stay there as well. Plus gas will always go to the lowest part, so the gun pits would be sodden with gas as well. And just trying to look through the dial side to apply information to do calculations behind a gas mask is incredibly difficult.
Yep, in the front, Jim.
My name's Jim Catchell. I have a question for Darryl. I believe the Red Baron was actually buried 3 times, although we only see in your photos the first burial.
That's right. He was then moved post-war from one cemetery to another. When he was then buried in Berlin, the Berlin Wall went right through his grave, so he was moved again, and now he's in a family plot. But somewhere along the line, part of his skeletal remains have gone missing, and that's his head. So he's now in a family plot, but he has been moved a number of times.
Yep. No Bossman.
My question's for Elizabeth. You mentioned before that you had various nations working together, so you had the French, the Italians, and some British. How did they actually organise and communicate? Did they standardise on one language, or did they all use their own tactics, techniques and procedures and just hope for the best?
Oh, they had interpreters. Each nation had a military mission. So the French had a military mission for, in fact, each of the Allied armies, and the British one was the biggest. So officers were allocated to each unit. At Amiens in 1918, the Raymond Brutinel's Canadian motor machine gun brigade was next to the French between the French and the Canadians, so they were able to communicate using, he of course had both English and French. It was certainly a problem, but interpreters were allocated to all units, and if they're alongside each other in battle, then there is definitely an interpreter as well as the liaison officer allocated. So in fact, although you have to translate, which slows things down a bit, the language levels were pretty poor actually. You don't get many. The French staff colleges taught German because Germany was the enemy. So there aren't many French officers speaking French, and there's certainly not many British officers speaking French, so there were difficulties. The Italians tended to be able to speak French. The Russians could speak French. But it is certainly one of the problems of coalition warfare.
I'll introduce Nick, who's going to wind the session up. That's probably the least appropriate phrase to have on the screen, isn't it? Everything's broken. Clearly in 1918 everything wasn't broken, and our speakers tonight have demonstrated the way in which the Allies cooperated and in fact, as Elizabeth points out, won the war in 112 days. But Nick, you representing the Royal Australian Historical Company, you should come and finish the session.
The Principles of War podcast is brought to you by James Ealing. The show notes for the Principles of War podcast are available at www.theprinciplesofwar.com for maps, photos and other information that didn't make it into the podcast. Follow us on Facebook or tweet us at Surprise Podcast. If you've enjoyed this podcast, please leave a review on iTunes and tag a mate in on one of our episodes. All opinions expressed by individuals are those of those individuals and not of any organisation.